All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashum, Yahweh Shai, Bahashum, Rachak Kodash. I want to give double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Well, and grace and peace to you, elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. This is your fellow servant, Rachaya from the GMS Orlando camp, coming at you with another impromptu lesson. And I wanted to bring this exhortation through the spirit, for the elect as well as myself to stay focused, stay focused. Because right now there are a lot of things taking place spiritually, all right, that we have to put our utmost attention into, especially when it comes to the building, of the Lord's temple, the building of the Lord's sheep. There's a lot going on concerning the increase of the ministry, and the increase of our own personal bodies, our own personal spirits, you know. And tonight's lesson is inspired by an encounter I just had maybe a couple of minutes ago. I'm sitting here in the park, you know, um, going for a walk, and as I was walking, an older gentleman, stopped me. He was in his 70s. He stopped me, perceived to be an Edomite. He looked like he was an Edomite, but upon further conversation, he could have been a Jake. But he stopped me. He commended me and he informed me on the benefits to the heart, to the health when it comes to walking. Why, how walking can help you walk daily. Getting into a spiel about health. He's an older gentleman in his 70s. You know, he's telling me different health tips that he's used to stay, vigorous and youthful in a sense. And he pointed out my water bottle, and which is alkaline water. I try to, drink and keep an alkaline diet to the best of my ability here in Babylon. And that's the case for most brothers. Try to keep a balanced diet, alkaline diet to the best of our ability, you know, to promote health. Scriptures say that bodily exercise profiteth little, but nonetheless it profited. And as you feel good, physically, it translates to the spirit, you know. But he pointed out my water bottle, and he asked me what got me into drinking alkaline water. What prompted me to start drinking alkaline water and trying to maintain an alkaline diet. And I told him, I didn't, I told him the bare necessities. I just try to keep a well balanced diet to promote health. And he was saying how a lot of this newer generation, is blinded because the higher ups, as he put it, don't want us to have the correct information when it comes to health. When it comes to promoting life within our bodies, they don't want us to know about the different things that are here on earth that are right in front of us, that promote life within our bodies. And I was agreeing because scripturally that's on point. Everything that the Lord created, all the plants, all the herbs that the Lord created were meat ultimately at the end of the day for the use of our health and to promote life within our bodies. And brothers now coming into the truth are starting to come back into that knowledge. You have some brothers who are very proficient when it comes to the knowledge of the herbs and their different healing properties. And brothers are really physicians when it boils down to it, returning onto this knowledge. But, as we were talking, it just made me think about ancient Rome. That statement just made me think about ancient Rome and how in the past, ancient Rome had something called bread and circus, which was ultimately to keep the minds of the people focused on folly rather than what was taking place in the government. Brothers have done many lessons on this, me and myself as well. But the whole point of bread and circus in ancient Rome was to divert the attention from the corrupt government, the failing government, and the corruption in the political party. Excuses. You know, how you doing? Wherever Jake is, Esau gotta follow. But the whole point behind Bread and Circus was to divert the minds of the people away from the failing and corrupt government and the failing political party. Which is the exact same thing that's taking place in Babylon today. All right, America, which is Babylon the Great according to the scriptures. All right, there's a very heavy spirit of bread and circus that's covering America to keep the people's minds away from what's taking place prophetically, which is all prophecy at the end of the day. But for us of the household of faith, the scriptures say in the book of Second Thessalonians, the first chapter, all right, that we are all the children of light. All right, we do not sleep as do others. Okay, we're all the children of light. Therefore, we're sober. And being the children of light, we have a duty to stay focused, to stay focused, and to continue to pour our attention into matters of importance, such as what's taking place spiritually, especially amongst the body. Right now we're also living in a time of acts, to where a great multitude is getting ready to be added unto the ministry. A great number of souls are getting ready to be added unto the ministry. Once they see the miracles and the prophecies of Yahweh Bahasham Yahushai take place, there are a lot of souls that are getting ready to be added. And with that being said, you know, us as leaders have to be ready. We have to be spiritually focused and honed in on the mission at hand. And now is more time than ever to be focused on the mission, not to be entangled with the affairs of this life, not to be entangled with the bread and circus that's taking place in this, in Babylon. All right, but to focus on matters of importance, which is prophecy, which is the ministry, all right, which is the building that the Lord has taken place now amongst ourselves and amongst the body. You know, Prophetically, America is being dismantled piece by piece, piece by piece. Right now, we're in a time to where Revelation, the 13th chapter, is speaking louder than ever. All right, Revelation 13 and 16, which is a prophecy that has been uh, scrutinized, it's been criticized, it's been opinionized. All right, but now it's starting to come to a point where opinion, scrutiny, and criticism is no longer um, it's no longer able to be said. It's no longer able to be had concerning the prophecy of the mark of the beast. Because the RFID microchip, the infrastructure surrounding the RFID microchip is being set in place as we speak. All right. And one of the biggest developments regarding the mark of the beast is with this company Palantir, all right, which essentially is setting all the groundwork, laying the groundwork, as well as these different data centers that are being set up in these different states: Arizona, Texas, Georgia, all right, LA. Um, but the infrastructure, all right, surrounding that beast technology, which will give Esau Edom the capability of tracking, tracing, identifying, all right, and really controlling those who receive that mark, is being set in place right now. All right. Um, they had something called Palantir Gotham, where the elder Yashawamba brought it out in one of his recent lessons, which was beautiful. That computer that Bruce Wayne built to survey in one of the comics, to survey Gotham, was basically an all-seeing eye. It was able to track and trace everything that was taking place in Gotham, which is exactly what Esau envisions for Babylon. All right. Everybody that receives this mark, he's able to track, trace, and control the aspects of buying and selling, just as the scriptures say, just as the prophecy said. And on top of that, we're also entering into the time of Jacob's trouble. All right. A time like never before since there was a nation. So in the Daniel, the 12th chapter, all right, Jeremiah, the 30th chapter, all right, in the 30th verse, we're entering into a time of Jacob's trouble, wherein the whole house of Jacob, Negroes, Latinos, Native American Indians, are going to be subject to a time of trouble, to where there's going to be all hell broke loose on the planet. The government is getting ready to fail. All right. The economy is getting ready to fail. The monetary system is getting ready to shift. And with that great shift that's getting ready to take place, there's going to be a lot of sedition. All right, which the word sedition goes into a concerted attempt to overthrow civil authority. All right, and what's taking place now? All right, with the civil unrest that's taking place, the that was a turtle. Yeah, that was a turtle. So like, but he just popped his head up. But with the amount of civil unrest that's taking place now, with the amount of people, especially Edomites, when you hone in on uh, the modern Edomite mindset, a lot of Edomites are disgruntled with the current state of the government because they thought that Trump would be their last great white hope, where he will set things back up like it was back in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, where their forefathers were able to uh, create generational wealth and keep it within, just that sect of Edomites. But since that hasn't happened, you have a lot of Edomites that are disgruntled, even with the war that is taking place and the funding that's being given unto those small hats in our land. You have a lot of Edomites who are disgruntled with that fact and with the fact that they can't. A lot of them are jobless. A lot of them are unable to find jobs in this current market. Um, a lot of them have been laid off. A lot of jobs are being taken up by Jakes in these different so-called hiring fields. In fields which were predominantly ran by Edomites at one point in time are now being taken over by Negroes and Latinos. All right. And on top of that, now it seems as if Jake is getting the hedge in this society. And they're disgruntled, which is going to cause a lot of that sedition. It's going to cause a lot of civil unrest, which the scriptures speak about, which is prophetic. And we're coming into that time. Nonetheless, to say all that, to say this, we're coming into the time to where prophecy is getting ready to manifest. The words on the pages are getting ready to become a reality. And so, with that being said, the Lord gave us this time, this grace period, to prepare ourselves mentally and spiritually for what we're getting ready to undertake, the journey, that we're getting ready to undertake. Because this journey is getting ready to get a whole lot more personal. You know, Palantir is spelled Palantir. Yeah, it's getting ready to get a whole lot more personal. The fire is getting ready to get hotter. But the Lord has given us the tools and the wisdom necessary not only to win the battle, but to overcome the war. The Lord has prepared us for the times that we're getting ready to enter into. We're getting ready to see a whole lot more than what the people are used to. We're getting ready to experience the power, the mercy, and the judgment of Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai on a whole nother level. So with that being said, now's the time to stay focused. You know, fuck the bread and circus. All right, hone in. The rest of the people they're gonna be caught up regardless. You know, like it says in Isaiah the 6th chapter, until the cities be wasted, the majority of Jake ain't gonna understand. They ain't gonna pay attention. But for us of the household of faith, us or of the light or of the day, the Lord is calling us to be sober, all right, mentally, spiritually, concerning the affairs of the spirit, concerning the affairs of the spirit. All right, now's the time to lock in. But with that being said, that's all I have. Lord, once is that I find it to you elect, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Bakakodash, and double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well. Grace and peace to you, elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. Shalom.